Hey guys! So, welcome back for day two of our four-part series. Today we are going to be covering returning to running. So, if you have any questions as we go, please drop them below. I already have some pre-submitted questions in the queue, which people in the group have commented throughout the week or have been submitted via Instagram. So, just to introduce myself, my name is Kate. I'm the head coach of the Helios ACL project, and I help athletes get back better after their ACL injury. So, today we are covering a very exciting topic and one that I think is top of mind for a lot of people going through ACL recovery, which is returning to running. Now, I think this question happens so often because there's a big discrepancy, right? Our protocol says one thing, and then when we get to, around 12 weeks, we're not always ready just yet. So that's why I decided to do this talk to give you guys a good gauge on what you actually should be looking for to know if you're ready to return to running, and when you are ready, how to start, common mistakes I see, and of course, we will save live Q&A at the end, unless it pertains to something I'm talking about, in which case, just drop the questions down below. Okay, let's start with a sip of water and dive in. So, how to know when you're ready to return to running. Now, this is one that, I think really, the mediocre ACL PT drops the ball on a lot. Because they go by just a protocol. Now, let's just briefly talk about what your protocol is meant to do. So, your protocol reflects graft healing. That's when we expect the graft will be ready for certain forces. The problem with a lot of these protocols is that they don't really bring up how you should present. They don't bring up how strong you should be. They don't bring up, like, neurologically, what should we be looking for. And that leads to puffy, swollen knees when you start to run. It leads to, slowing of your progress, maybe even some backsliding of your range of motion when you progress things that you're not ready for. So I think this is a really pertinent conversation and one you guys are going to get a lot out of. So as far as criteria to return to run, there's a couple of non-negotiables which I think we should cover first. So, non-negotiables, you need to be at least 12 weeks out from your surgery. That is a non-negotiable. This is because we need the graft to be healed enough to sustain the forces that running is going to put on your knee. The second thing we're going to need is to make sure you have full and complete knee extension. The reason that this is so important is that if you do not have full knee extension, it changes the way forces happen to your knee. So not only does it change it at your knee, but it might make you utilize other muscle groups such as, in a way that's not helpful. So it might make you change the way you're landing on your foot. It might make your hip drop to get out of using your quadricep. Because ACLers are master compensators. So when you're not strong enough, or when you don't have full knee extension, it's going to change the way you run. And that's what we want to avoid. So 12 weeks out, full knee extension. Now we're going to get into the nitty gritty of what you should be able to do strength-wise, but those are two non-negotiables. I also include in my non-negotiables, you should have no pain with walking, no pain going down the stairs, step over step. You should be able to do pretty much all your activities of daily living without any issues. This tells us that there's a good chance your tissues are healthy enough and happy enough to start the running process. Okay, so these are our three non-negotiables. Now, when it comes to strength testing itself, this is where we can start to dive in pretty deep. Now, I want to talk about the importance of strength testing before I discuss exactly what you should be hitting and what criteria you should be looking for. So, it's important to test your strength, not with the manual muscle test, which is when you try to kick out and your PT holds you and resists against you. That is not strength testing, guys. That is a wrestling match. That is for fun. In best case scenario, gives your PT an idea of like where to keep looking and where to investigate strength wise. A actual strength test is when a PT uses a device, or you go to a facility that has a device that puts a number on your strength. It cannot be done without a device. Now, the reason it's so important is, as I kind of said before, ACLers are master compensators. That means you guys can get out of using your quadricep, and part of that is neurological. Part of that is, maybe your PT progressed you to like things you weren't ready for before your quad started to get strong. So now your body learns not to use it if possible. And I know that's kind of like a dense subject, so I could probably do a whole live on like why that happens in the future, but that's kind of what we're looking at. Now, if you're not strong enough and you start to run, what often happens is you start to use funky walking patterns, or running patterns, I should say. It changes the forces on both your ankle, knee, joints, hips, even can develop shoulder problems, right? From repetitive movements that, are too much. Because here's what we need to know, guys. Every mile you run is 1,500 to 2,000 hops. So this is a pretty actually high impact activity, even though we don't think of it as repeated jumping. So if your body, if your tissue capacity isn't strong enough, then you're going to get some undue and unbalanced forces on your body, which your body never likes. Okay. So when it comes to actual strength testing, there's a couple of things that I look at, and this is how I do it with my remote athletes to know if they are ready or not. So first, I will have them do a battery of functional tests. This includes without getting too deep into it, this includes a timed side plank, single leg sit to stand test, single leg step down test, single leg glute bridge test. It includes a single leg calf raise. So we're kind of looking at what can your knee do? What can your hips do? Because they need to support your knees. What can your calves do? Because they need to be strong too. We're making sure that at every joint, you have the correct amount of movement. So I'm not going to start throwing out like degrees unless people want to know specifics, in which case you could just drop them down below. So we're looking at the motion in your hips, motion in your knees, motion in your ankles. Make sure that it's the same as your other side before we start some of this stuff. So you really should have full range of motion of your knee before you're even attempting to run ever. That is like a non-negotiable for me. So once we pass the functional testing, which is kind of a gross measure of the resilience or your tissue capacity in all the muscle groups, then we're going to look at your strength. The reason we structure it like this immediately after is we want to look at how your muscles perform when they're fatigued, because this is going to give us much more information on how you're going to perform when you're running, right? As we run, we all fatigue. Sometimes if you're not strong enough, you start to change your gait pattern. So it's important that we're looking at these numbers after you've done some higher level strength testing. So when it comes to when you are ready to run, there's some pretty clear research on exactly what the numbers need to be in order to say that you are safe and you're not going to get hurt. So I'm going to throw out a number, and it might not make sense to you guys just yet, but I'm going to make it make sense. So you've heard of limb symmetry index. Traditionally, this is, how strong your injured side is to your non-injured side. But there's a big limitation in limb symmetry index in that it doesn't account for your body weight. And a big mistake the mediocre ACL PT team makes is that they don't have the athlete or athletic person working their other quadricep muscles or their non-injured leg while they're going through rehab. So now if you detrain a muscle for 12 weeks, it's going to get weaker. So let's say we test, and this is assuming your PT's tested your strength because it's the most important thing. We're assuming that your non-injured side stayed the same strength throughout those 12 weeks where you didn't train it. But that's not how it works. Detraining, the effects of detraining start within 48 hours, right? So now multiply that by 12 weeks, that quad is a lot weaker. So now when we test it to your ACL side, it's gonna look a lot closer. And this is where people really go wrong. If you only go off of limb symmetry index or how strong one side is compared to the other, it's not the full picture. We need to be looking at this, the force your quad can kick, measured by a device, in relation to your body weight. This is what tells us you're ready. So I always say, like, these are guidelines, right? So we want to make sure we're checking off as much of this stuff as possible. Now, there are some other tests which I'd call more like gold standard tests that not everyone has access to. I'm going to give you an example of those. That's going to be isokinetic testing, which is when you go to a facility, you hook your knee up to a machine, and they test how hard you can kick repeatedly through a full range of motion. That's like the gold standard. Tests that measure neurological readiness. There's something called a quick board, right? Where we look at how quickly you can react to things. It measures the ground reaction force. I don't want to get too sciencey with this talk, guys, but it goes pretty deep, right? So those are some gold standard things. Those are things that I think not everyone has access to, but if you can seek it out, let's do it. Let's get that more concrete data to make the decision. If you can't do that, what I'm talking about today is like silver standards, right? These are things that are going to help us make the best decision that we can with the information we have, but understand that if we go lower than the silver standards, then we're not really getting any accurate information, and this is where it really falls flat. So as far as like testing, it goes so deep, and you know, you can really go super crazy with it. So I'm just explaining today how I do it as a remote coach. If you have access to that really great in-person testing, let's get you there because it's going to be some better data. Okay, that was a little bit of a side tangent. Bear with me. So now when we're looking at the number you need to kick when you're doing a strength test, we want to compare it to your body weight. So the research shows that if you can kick, and this is going to be a number that doesn't sound like it has a lot of context, but I'll make it make sense, is 1.48 Newton meters per kilogram. The return to sport number for high level activity is 3.0 Newton meters per kilogram. So what that means in plain English is that in order to return to run, we want to see that your quadricep can reasonably kick a good portion of your body weight, which is a little bit different than just like if you go on a machine and kick a number that's equal to your body weight in pounds. It's a little bit different than that. This is a calculation. And when it comes to returning to sport stuff, this is further down the line. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. We're going to make sure that you can kick your body weight. So these are where these numbers come from. It's a calculation that relates the peak force, or the biggest amount of force your muscle can kick into a device, to your body weight. I hope that's clear. If it's not clear, definitely drop a question down below. Okay, so that's the quick and dirty on the return to running testing. Now, I always like to talk about different elements of testing. So we have the objective part, which is kind of what I talked about, where we get some numbers around your strength, we get some more empirical data. Then we have the mental readiness, and we also have like how much have you prepared for this? So once we do return to sport testing, I'm sorry, not return to sport, return to running testing. We're not on return to sport yet. Once we do the return to running testing, now we're going to take that information and say, okay, it's time to prepare for running. Because the worst thing you could do is get tested and then not be ready and just start running. You know, I see it all the time. People just, oh, you're cleared to run, go run 10 minutes. What? No, that is not how we do it. So there's a phase in between here where you should be looking at, you know, how ready are you for the forces of running? Because you know how I mentioned that there's 2,000 hops in a mile, right? That means we need to actually start jumping before we start running. I know, who knew? So that means we're gonna start a 2 to 3 week program where we add in some pogo hops. Pogo hops just help get your knees ready for, they're like a little jump that is very similar to the forces you endure during running. We start a series where it starts with double leg switches, single leg, and that way I can say, okay, based on the last 24 hours, did you hop and then your knee swell up? That tells me that you're not ready. So then we go back to the strength and we just kind of go like that. So what you should be taking from this is it all is very based, when we do this the right way, it all is very based on what your body can actually do, not what the protocol says. Because if we just go based off the protocol, remember, that's when we get puffy knees, swollen, not feeling so good, right? And in turn, that teaches your body not to use your quadricep, which puts you at risk of injury later on. So every step we take through this returning running phase is going to impact what happens down the line. That's why it's so important that we do this right. Now, my goal is not to scare you guys. It's just to arm you with the best information possible. Okay, so we've done our return to running prep phase, right? If you have any questions about that, please drop them below. I'm happy to answer them. Okay, so the other thing that I still group in like how to know if you're ready is the mental readiness, right? If someone says, you know, if someone were to come and chase you right now, would you be able to run? And you're like, absolutely not. Then it's okay to wait. You know, there's no downside to waiting on this if you're allowing yourself time to get strong, right? So if you're someone that feels super anxious around this, super unready, there's nothing wrong with waiting, because being mentally ready is, you know, the biggest predictor if you're going to have a positive outcome with this. Now, the nitty gritty of the mental game, we're going to do in 2 weeks, but still worth noting that this is something that we're looking at. Okay, so I feel like it took me 18 minutes to get through the return to sport testing pieces of this. If anyone has any questions, please drop them below. Okay, so now when you are when you are ready to run, how do you start? I like to do it like this. So we do the return to running plyometric phase where we prep your joints, get everything ready, make sure your ankles, knees, everything is happy and healthy. When you start to do some of this jumping, start to do some of the preparatory activities, which I could dive into deeper if you guys want, but we're just going to assume that you've done them and you're good. Then we're going to want to start with an interval running program. So an interval running program means that you're doing walk-run cycles. What I would recommend, there's 2 different ways to do it. One, you could do it on a treadmill so you can control your pace. I kind of like to just do it not on a treadmill. If you can find somewhere that you know is safe, that has flat ground, that's going to be the best place to do it. Bring your phone out, bring your sneakers, and go. So you do a interval running phase. I usually start with 30 seconds running, 1 minute or double the time walking. If that, and here's the thing, guys, first run expectations, it's not going to feel good. It's going to feel wonky. It's going to feel like this knee is alien to me, but it should not feel painful. If it feels painful, you are not ready. And there's nothing wrong with not being ready yet, because we want to make you as most successful as you could be throughout the whole process, the whole journey. Don't rush this stuff. It's gonna come to you when your body is ready. So if you have any pain, that's a no-go. We step it back a little bit. So I do have a 4-week interval running program that is a free resource on my page. If anyone wants it, you could just comment below. That kind of details exactly the strategy, but here are some in terms of like how we step it up time-wise, but I just want to give you some like broad brushstrokes. So in general, you're going to be doing, 30 seconds on, double the time off, and you do that for a week. If you have no increased swelling at your knee, you're cleared for 24 hours after, or at the end of the week, you're cleared to move on to the next phase, which we bump up the running time, also still bumping up the walking time, and you just do it like that. So overall, you're going to be going out for about 30 minutes over the course of a full month. It's really important that you do this slowly so you're not overloading your joints. You're going to slowly increase your time from 30 seconds running to 10 minutes running. And then after that point, you can kind of adopt a more regular running program that's almost more like a couch to 5K program, but you're going to be adding in a little bit longer runs. And I think it's really important to note that throughout this period, the rest days are tools. So you don't go out and run every day. Certainly not. We got to let time for your tissues to relax. Remember, this is like a newborn infant baby knee. It doesn't matter how athletic you were before your injury. We have to meet your body where it's at now in order to have the best outcome possible. So let's see. Oh, some notes I want you guys to know about as you're progressing after that like 10-minute point is that never increase your running distance in a week by more than 8 to 10%. So that means you're not going, just because you used to run 5Ks all the time. It means once you can run 10 minutes, you're not going to suddenly bump up your distance super far over the course of a week. You're going to do it slowly. And I think this is probably the biggest mistake I see. People like so excited to start jogging and running that they just completely go from like 0 to 100, and then their knee is like super swollen and stiff. And they're like, I don't know why that happened. It's because you bumped it up too much. Now, there's something I like to, there's different ways to think about it, right? So if there's not just distance when it comes to running, there's also the surface you're running on. So that could be if there's hills, that could be a street, it could be if you're running on grass, and time running. So distance and time, I guess we could kind of group them together, but meaning like, okay, so time running would be the time that you're out in total, including the walking intervals, and okay, yeah. So let me start from the beginning. So when we are doing our walk run intervals and working through a place where we're stepping it up, that total time counts as your run. So if you're going to bump up your running distance and time and walking intervals, make sure you're counting the whole thing so that way you don't do too much time on your feet. Okay, I think that was clear. If it wasn't clear, please drop a question below. Okay, so as far as, how we bump it up after, you want to consider the distance and you want to consider the surface you're running on. So you're never going to increase your course or change your course where you're running on a bunch of hills, and increase your distance the same week. If you do both, then you're advancing two constructs at once, which it's not likely your knee is going to like that. So big brushstrokes here take away the fact that you need to consider where you're running, the surface you're running, the distance you're running, and the amount of recovery you've had as you progress yourself through this journey. Now, if you have a physical therapist that just said, go crazy, run, and that doesn't sound right to you, please reach out to me because I have free resources that I would love to share with you guys, all on returning to running and minimizing the amount your knee gets pissed off at you. So please reach out. Happy to share that. When it comes to sprinting, that's kind of like a little bit of a different animal. So this conversation today is mainly about like how to get off the ground and starting to move. As far as like sprinting, that's a power-based movement. It means you need to contract your quads and explode really fast. That is something that doesn't come back right away just because of the neurological process your body goes through after ACL injury. Now, that is something that can be obviously reached, but this is like the beginning stuff. Moving on to sprinting, you want to wait until you can tolerate, at least running for 15, 20 minutes at a time before you start to integrate some of that faster speed work. And here are some signs that would tell you that you're doing too much, which I'm sorry if I'm beating a dead horse, but I think it's just super important because one of the rules that people follow who are successful at this is they don't overdo it and they don't push through swelling. Pushing through swelling is like the biggest mistake you can make really throughout your ACL recovery in general, but definitely returning to running. Okay, so I lost my train of thought. What was I saying? What was I just saying? Okay, whatever. I'm going to bring it back. So as we go, I'm going to be so annoyed when I watch this back and I have such a good nugget to drop for you guys. Oh, signs that you're doing too much. There we go. It came to me. So it's going to be if you push through swelling. Now, we want to monitor for swelling in the 24 hours after we run, not just pain during the moment. Okay, I'm going to say that again. If you have swelling in the 24 hours after you run, you need a rest day. You may need 2. You may need 3. You may need to go back to the drawing board and start to add more intense strength stuff before you even try it again. I'm not a big advocate for cutting running away completely, but we want to make sure that we're progressing you in a way that you are as safe as humanly possible. Okay. And I think that pretty much covers common mistakes and things that I see that usually go wrong. So we're going to hop into the Q&A. I haven't had any questions pop up just yet, but if they do, I'm happy to answer them. So are there any reasons not to run? This was a question that was commented on the post yesterday. So yes, there are reasons not to run. So let's assume in the context of this question that you've passed all of your return to running testing and you have no issues. So reasons that you should stop a run if you're like already on one. If you have sharp pain, that's anywhere, so it could be in your back, hip, knee, ankle, don't push through that. If you have swelling, as I've already said, if you're not 12 weeks out, I feel like that's kind of a no-brainer. But other than that, as long as you've passed your return to run testing, I'm going to keep beating a dead horse here. Testing is the most important thing to make sure you're safe throughout your ACL recovery in general. So if you're not being tested, that's a reason not to run in the first place. But that pretty much would be the big reasons. Okay. So this is a question, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but someone had dropped a question in the group that was asking, is it still normal to have pain and swelling or have pain with running 6 months, 7 months out? So I have a twofold answer to this. First and foremost, right, if you're having pain with something, it's a sign that your body is not ready for it and your joints are being overloaded. This isn't something that we want to push through. We want to get to the root cause of why. So the usual reasons if someone is having pain are that they are not strong enough yet to start, and they started, or they're overdoing it. So they try to bump up their distance or bump up their intensity too quickly, and that their body isn't liking that. Now, as far as, what is going on with this person's specific case, there could be a lot of factors, right? There's always more than one reason why something happens, and it would be really great to have like full details, but just know that if you are running and you have pain 6, 7 months out, that is a red flag, and you need to be evaluated thoroughly by someone that works with lots of ACLers, knows how to test, and has your best interest in mind, and isn't looking past red flag symptoms like swelling and pain. So I hope that's clear enough. If it's not, please drop a question below, and we'll go from there. Okay, so I had some submitted questions from Instagram as well. So I'm going to pull those up. Okay. What is your opinion on the AlterG treadmill? So for those of you that don't know, the AlterG treadmill is a treadmill that you put these like pants on that look like almost like scuba pants, and then you zip into it and it unweights you. So what that means is like you could put in a number on it, and let's say it will reduce the gravity around you to less than 50%, not literally, it puffs air in there to unweight you. So that way there's not as much forces on your body. So what the goal is of an AlterG treadmill. They also have this with like water treadmills where you press a button and it fills up. It's actually pretty nifty, honestly. The goal of that is to reduce the ground reaction forces. So ground reaction force is like a physics principle, which just shows how much force you exert on the ground, and therefore your muscles must exert to keep you in motion. Its goal basically reduces the amount of torque your muscles have to produce. So like in plain English, it makes it so you can be less strong and still move without issues and still maintain your running pattern. So I think the most useful part of AlterG treadmills is that like the mental piece of it, they make you feel like you're running. They make you feel like you're doing something athletic, which I think a lot of people struggle with when they lose that piece throughout their recovery. Like they lose they can't exercise, they lose they don't feel like them, right? And I think sometimes, even if it's not progressing them further in their rehab, I think for that purpose, there's a big use in that. And it can be really helpful just like dealing with the mental piece of it to feel like you're making progress. Sometimes when progress can be really slow. There has been some evidence that it does help maintain your VO2 max through injury. This research, however, is not conducted on people with ACL injury. It's more injured runners. I feel safe grouping ACLers into that it could be a good option to keep your fitness up. So I think in that it's useful. What's important to note about the AlterG treadmill And anytime you're in something like pool running or something that unweights you, is it's going to change your mechanics. Now, whether that's bad or good is kind of still undetermined. I think that you have to understand what the tool is used for, right? It's not going to be able to make you get back to running faster on the ground per se, but I think it is a pretty cool way. Let's say, if someone is ready to run, and we've tested them and we know they're ready to run, I think it's a cool way to ease them into it. But don't take an Ultra G treadmill and replace your full gravity strengthening. Like if you are in PT for an hour, I think it's most useful to your time to like do the strengthening or, get it done outside of PT if you're going to be using part of your session for the Ultra G. And every clinic is different, right? So like some clinics you are allowed to be there for like 2 hours, which okay, then sure, use it. But don't get rid of your like full gravity stuff to do this, unless you feel like you really need to like mentally. If that's not clear, please drop a question below. Okay. Now the next question. How should it feel? Will you feel the impact of each step when you run? This is an interesting question because I don't think there's one way it feels for everyone. I think everyone is like a little bit different. However, let's talk about what it will feel like, which we like kind of touched on, and then what it shouldn't feel like. So like you have lanes of what to expect. So it will feel weird. Your first couple runs, that knee is not going to feel like you own it. It's going to feel like it's alien to you, right? And this is a common thing across the board. People after ACL injury report. But we want to make sure that it doesn't feel. There's a difference between like discomfort and pain. It can feel like a little odd, but you shouldn't be like crossing the bridge to like super uncomfortable, because that's just a sign that you're probably not ready or you're trying to do too much. Like when I have people start, it's literally like 10 seconds. Like we're literally starting with 10 seconds. And then, okay, how did that feel? Did you feel super worried about your knee? No? Okay, carry on. Like I said, we shouldn't be feeling sharp pain. We shouldn't be feeling sharp pains, not even just in the knee, anywhere. But it is kind of like, it would be hard to describe exactly how it should feel. It's going to be odd. It shouldn't be bad. That's kind of where I'll leave that one. Okay, I have 2 more questions. What do you do if you pass all the return to running tests, but it still hurts to run? Okay, fantastic question. Okay. How I would approach this is, first off, where is it hurting when you run? That's something we need to dive into. We need to see if like a lot of times I'll have or see people that will develop IT band syndrome or like shin splints if they're not strong enough, or they're doing any of the mistakes we mentioned before, like upping their distance too much, upping their course, or changing their course too much. So first we're going to dive into like where the pain is. Now let's assume it's in your knee, right? Our body is super smart. It's going to protect us, 24/7. So if it's still hurting to run and you've passed all the testing, which occasionally happens, we're going to find what you can do and work within there until you can move beyond it. So let's say it hurts when you get to like a mile. Okay, let's go to 75% of that, a place where you're not having pain. Work within that until we can get your body resilient enough to be ready. Because it's not all about strength. sometimes the joint itself needs to get used to forces coming through it repeatedly again. So we're going to allow time for that. We're going to change our running strategy. That might mean changing the surface we run on. Might mean like, hey, let's look into like, are those running shoes new? Let's see if we can get you some ones that are accommodate how your feet are set up, because that's a factor too. We're going to make sure that, my return to running tests are honestly, I think, more vigorous than even the literature suggests in terms of like strength stuff. So my people don't usually run into this problem, but if you happen to be running into this problem, let's check your other body parts. Let's make sure your hips are strong enough to be supporting you. Let's make sure your anterior tib and the muscles on the back of your calf are strong enough. Let's look at comprehensively this whole person in front of me. What else could be going wrong? IT band syndrome is one of the most common ones, and people are like, oh, my IT band is just tight, right? And it usually is not the case. Usually it has to do with their glute medius strength. That's a big predictor of developing IT band syndrome. So stuff like that, you really need to dive into the case, obviously, but it's not uncommon. We are all human beings. You can't just put in a new ACL and then suddenly you're ready for everything, because sometimes it does take like 6, 7, 8 months to get back to safe running, and that's okay, because I want you to be safe. But now think about all that detraining that happened, and we have to allow time for your body to get used to all of that again. Okay, this is my last question. Do you care more about symmetry or the amount of force that can be kicked? Now, if you're wondering why people know to ask this, on my Instagram page, I post about strength testing literally all the time. So I think a lot of people that follow me are kind of more up to date on that. I'm not sure if like your guys' PTs discuss this stuff with you, but testing. So I kind of already touched on this, but limb symmetry index tends to overestimate your function, especially if you're someone that took a long time to get back to running. So it matters much more the torque of your, okay, so let me explain this in plain terms. How much force your knee can kick in relation to your body weight. Now, I kind of touched upon this, but I just want to make it more clear. The reason we care so much about what your quad can do, and because I'm sure you guys have seen online, like quad. The reason we care so much is that your quadricep group 4 muscles in the front of your thigh, they are the ones that slow your knee down when it's trying to stop your body weight or when it's trying to stop you from moving. So like if you're running fast and slowing down, your quads are going to be the one that do that. So in order to control the amount of forces on your knee, that muscle is like the biggest teller of your function, of how everything will be tolerated at your knee. That's why we're so obsessed about talking about it. And yeah, so that pretty much concludes our return to running talk. We covered a lot of stuff, guys. I only lost my train of thought once, which I think was like a big win, especially after 43 minutes of talking. So like, let's just summarize some of the things you should have learned from this to make it as clear as possible. So when do we know it's safe to run? We need to make sure our knee is straight. If it's not straight, you're not running. We need to make sure it stays straight throughout the day, by the way, not just straight for one stretch. Okay, cheaters, no cheating here. We need to make sure we're at least 12 weeks after surgery. We need to make sure that our quad is tested and we're hitting certain numbers that reflects that we can stop almost our body weight. That is the most important piece. If you take anything away, you need to be tested. We're going to look at all the joints around the knee to make sure you're ready. We're going to start you on a plyometric program, which means we get a little jumpy, a little bouncy, do some run prep activities before we even start. When it is time to start, you're going to make sure you start slowly. You're going to start with a walk-run program. You're not going to vary the surface up too much. We're going to keep it pretty consistent. If we have any swelling, that means you've done too much. We're going to bump it up slowly over the course of a month, and that's going to keep you as safe as possible. Common mistakes are running through swelling, not taking rest days, at least 1 to 2 between every run, and trying to change your surface too much. And I think that's it. Bada bing. So if you have any questions, please drop them below. I'm going to be monitoring this post for the next week to make sure I get to any questions. And that's it. So I'm Kate. You can follow me on Instagram at Helios ACL Project. I help ACL athletes throughout their entire recovery process. And if you have questions, concerns, I'd love to help you too. Have a great day.